I am Will Nuessle, and this is the School of Fiction channel.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to welcome you very much to the School of Fiction channel. If this is your first video, I'm Matt Posner. I'm your teacher for School of Fiction, and Will is going to be your teacher today. And we're going to start talking about his work and his life and his career. And then we have a couple of, I guess, free-ranging topics that we're going to cover. So, Will, I was really impressed by this, which I saw in an article about you. Your writing career, 34 years, 17 novels, 2 screenplays, and television miniseries. So please pick anything from there and tell us about that.
And that article is a little out of date. We're 36 years now, assuming the 10 years that I gave up and I was never going to write fiction again, but wrote thousands of stand-up comedy jokes and a bunch of nonfiction and so forth counts. And
Counts.
yeah,
Everything
something
counts
like
when you're a writer. Everything
19
counts.
novels, 6 screenplays. No, pardon me, only five screenplays and 2 television miniseries at the moment. A really good friend of mine recently called me Cookie Monster, but with words that I'm just they're coming out of me all the time.
Well, that reminds me of 2 writers, Brandon Sanderson and Stephen King. Both have that same attribute. Brandon Sanderson seems to write when he's asleep at this point. So
And I've heard Stephen King wrote Shawshank Redemption. I think it's got to be just the outline, not word for word, but during a rain delay at a Mets game is the legend. And yeah, I have written. I was writing, wrote a page or two at my kid's dentist appointment today while they were in getting checked out. I've written during intermission at dance recitals that I was filming. I'll write pretty much anywhere.
I write when I'm tutoring. My students will do practice material, and I have the notebook there, and I work. Lately, I've been writing stuff for this channel, but that's almost the only place I can work on fiction during a school day. So yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from. Just try to get in some whenever you can, and it's the best way to keep your mind active too.
It's so much fun, and there's elements to writing where after 36 years, I would like to be in a different place than I am, but just that God made me one in the first place, that I get to do this, I'm so thankful. It's such a treat that I get to tell stories. So
Can I
very
hear a
blessed.
little more about the miniseries? Because you'd be the first person I've spoken to who's written that
You said miniseries?
miniseries.
Yes. So basically, to go back a bit, I have a film associate of sciences 2-year community college degree in film and video, and one semester took both screenwriting and television writing the same semester. And the professor who taught both told me, you can't. There's too much writing. Nobody's ever done this. And I was too stupid to realize that he was probably right, and too stupid to know I would fail. And I didn't. I wrote both a terrible television script and a terrible film script in the same semester, got A's in both classes, as I recall. And then a couple years after that, wrote one screenplay just kind of as therapy. I had been broken up with, and it's like, well, if I'm going to experience a love story, I might as well write one. And so then we flash forward about 20 years, and I was writing up a storm, but it was all novels, maybe nonfiction, weekly blog entries. I had just a vague thought about screenwriting at some point, maybe. And then one day to the next, I woke up and one of the books that I had completed that's actually out in the world, I needed to see it as a script. I could not rest until I'd made a script out of it and thought it would be a movie, except this story, there was so much to tell that by the time I was done, I had about 500 so pages. And so at the moment, it could be split up into episodic length. And I did that with a different one of my books, as well as 4 others that were like, yeah, this story could be told in 2 hours or less.
Did
So
you use
it's
a screenwriting software that offered
I
like
use
that?
don't tell anybody. I use the free template that Microsoft Word provides.
Okay.
I have been told that if you're not using Final Draft, you're an idiot, but lots of things I do the dumb way. So why spend money for something that nobody currently wants to pay me for anyway? Um, but yeah, Microsoft Word has free templates, and I did a little jiggery pokery to get it to where there were enough lines per page where I liked how it was being laid out, but I can't tell a difference, and it's free, which was the right price for me. So
Yeah, I agree. No, I've never touched Final Draft either, but no, I think I've gone the opposite way because I started writing a what I thought was going to be a TV miniseries, and I wound up instead turning it into a novel. It's very dialogue heavy because of that. So
Sure.
I've
My novels tend to be very dialogue heavy. I want to be Aaron Sorkin when I grow up, basically. I love it when people are talking to each other and they're having fun. And I'm aware that descriptions and plot are they're weaknesses for me. I'm better at dialogue and characters, so that's what I lean on by and large. But that helps when writing a script because you want to have people talking to each other.
Yeah, I watched a lot of TV sitcoms in the 70s and 80s, and so that's kind of where I got it from, plus a few others on top of that. I guess maybe I wanted to be Neil Simon at one point. So,
One thing for any budding scriptwriters that happen to be
uh,
out there, movies got to move. I beta read one screenplay and the several works by the same author, and he's very earnest, and I believe in his ability. But I counted at one point, and there was 25 straight pages, two characters talking to each other at a table. 25 pages, 25 minutes of screen time of just back and forth talking head. Nothing was happening, and I'm like, this. Nobody's going to want to watch this. I mean, my dinner with Andre moved faster than this,
I would see we are the same generation because I was just thinking of that myself.
and that's it's this nowadays. It'd be a challenge to get somebody maybe to sit down and watch that, but yeah, movies got to move. That's the whole point of the medium. And since you can show, especially in a spec script, you can show whatever you want. Budget be damned. So why not really get out there and have fun with it?
Okay. So, dialogue, then let's make that the first of our major topics. And would invite you to give any kind of keys or secrets that you have for dialogue in terms of pacing. And a few things I wanted to bring up also were subtext and choices of dialogue tags. So I'll throw all that out there and
Yeah,
go
I
where you want with it.
just last week reread Lou Hunter's Screenwriting 434, which I highly recommend for any writer, but especially someone writing for screen. And he was talking about one of the greatest things we can do with dialogue is what the characters are not saying. So you've got two characters that the audience, whether it's a novel, screenplay, it doesn't matter. Two characters the audience knows, and I'll pull an example out of my ear. Say they are getting a divorce, and the audience knows, the characters know, but the conversation is about what are they going to do about the mouse that's hiding behind the refrigerator. And the conversation, if you didn't know the characters, you walked in on this situation, you've never seen them before, you think it's about a mouse behind the refrigerator. But because you do know the characters, and you know that the divorce paper that one of them has signed and the other has not in the other room is far more important than whatever this stupid mouse is doing. It's what they're not talking about. And you can see the interaction and see why this conversation, we're talking about this because the mouse is so much easier to talk about than these papers. But it's getting blown out of proportion. The emotions are way huger than they should be because that's not what we're really talking about. We really are talking about the papers in the next room. And this is why the divorces happen. Again, I'm making this up as I go, but you never deal with things. I always have to deal with everything. And that's why I'm leaving, and so on and so forth. Another great, just, I don't know, tip, something to keep in mind. Again, it was in that screenwriting book. Might have been Neil Simon or somebody, and I'd have to look up, see who it was, but why are these two characters arguing and why are they both right can make for a fantastic scene. But any scene, whether there's dialogue or it's between two characters who have nothing to say to each other, every scene needs conflict and stakes. The conflict doesn't have to be, if we don't clip the right wire, the city is going to explode. The conflict can just be, hey, there's a mouse behind the fridge and it's freaking me out. Or Kurt Vonnegut talks about the main character needing a glass of water on the first page. The conflict can be anything, and the stakes can be anything. But if there's nothing, I go back to that 25 pages of talking head dialogue. The script was about a folk singer. It might have been Gordon Lightfoot, somebody's life story. And he and his wife were just chatting about the past. And there was nothing there. The conversation might have been interesting to them, but anybody coming along is like, why am I listening to this? Nobody wants anything. Nobody's trying to get anything. If there's no conflict, if there's no stakes, there's no story.
Exactly.
One other thing that's come to mind, especially for dialogue, it is harder than people probably realize to write dialogue that sounds like it's the way a person would talk. It's not a bad exercise at all for any aspiring writer to go and sit down at Starbucks and just take notes, just transcribe a random conversation that they're overhearing, and then look at it later and see how many, try to do it word for word and see how many ums and ahs, and you start to say a sentence, but then you start to say it again, and maybe you say it a third time. And if you can get a hold of a transcript, say a court deposition or something, Lou Hunter, again, back to the screenwriting book, got to listen to like 24 hours of mob enforcers who had been recorded by the FBI because he was doing a script on something related to that. And he said none of it was at all usable because these were guys trying to sound tough, trying to talk like guys they saw in the movies. The really good dialogue, whether it's novels, script, whatever, it sounds like it's what people would say because it's more clean, it's more polished. Every sentence probably is moving things forward, character development, plot development. Very little is just going to be, oh yeah, what was I talking about? Oh wait, the way that we all talk. Don't put that in the your novel.
So
And I can tell on myself. One of the books the one that I turned into a screenplay, The Feud, wrote it twice in the '90s when I was a teenager and thought it was pretty good. Went back to it in 2019 after a 2-decade break and was very disappointed in myself. I was a teenager when I wrote what the teenagers were saying, and it didn't sound like anything a teenager would say because I didn't know how to write dialogue yet.
I'm going to throw it back to Aristotle and to somewhere in the Poetics, and I can't remember where, but he says that the goal of a fiction is not to record what actually happens, but to record what we feel should happen.
Yes.
The way so it's not what it is, but how we feel it should be. And if you do that, then you're creating what's called verisimilitude, the feeling of reality rather than reality. And that's exactly what you're saying, because if it's working correctly the way you're describing, then it will seem like, yeah, this is the way people talk, this is the way people talk. And reality is it's better than the way people talk. But for us, it creates that dream and the entertainment value through our making us feel like that's how it should be.
And somebody described it, I wish I could say who, but you really know you're in the zone when it reads like a vivid, continuous dream. And the story pulls you along. And anytime the writer is visible, anytime you see, oh, I see what the joke that the writer put in there, or oh, that's a big word the writer just used. Anytime the writer calls attention to themselves, they're probably doing it wrong. The only rule, there's only one unbreakable rule, it has to work. And Douglas Adams breaks the fourth wall and it works. A lot of writers break the fourth wall and it works. A lot of writers, Tom Wolfe, he's one of 3 writers. I will read anything he has put to paper. I don't care if it's a grocery list. I want to read it, fiction, nonfiction, anything. And he will have sentences that are half a page long, full page, page and a half page, one sentence. And normally you can't get away with that, but he does. And he will throw in gigantic vocabulary words. He will make up words. He will have somebody say, and it'll go on for a sentence, a line and a half. But it works because of his style of writing, because of the voice that he has and that his characters have. But you have to learn what the rules are. And anybody, like I say, that if you're calling attention to yourself, and I see a lot of new writers using what seem like the biggest words in the world when a word that's very simple would do the same job and also not draw attention away from the story that's being told.
New writers watching, do not write with a thesaurus or any equivalent thereof. It's good to add words to your vocabulary, but you do want to use the best word rather than try to impress with the choice.
Difference between a good word and the best word is Mark Twain. The difference between lightning and the lightning bug. And most, I again don't know where I read this, but I believe it. The average good writer uses maybe 1,000 words of the 500,000 or so available in the English language. Most of the time, there's about 1,000 that you'll use over and over and over. And every so often, you'll cherry pick one that's just right. But most of the time, a fairly simple vocabulary is probably going to see you out pretty good. You had mentioned earlier, while I'm thinking about it, dialogue tags. Mm-hmm. Learning just how to write dialogue in such a way. A lot of, I don't know what the school is that's telling writers anytime any character says anything, it needs to be a new paragraph. Don't do that. If a character walks into Jane threw the towel on the table and then she says something, I can't stand it anymore. Don't put I can't stand it anymore onto a new paragraph because the reader will think somebody else said it because Jane had the last paragraph. So
Well,
Dialogue
I
can
was
come in
teaching that,
between. Go
that
ahead.
that's
Sorry.
called the indirect tag, right? The indirect
Dialogue can come
should be
between.
right next to the speech because it is a way of indicating the speech without putting Jane said.
Yes. And
And
another thing, please don't do this. I can't believe you said that, Jane said. But you told me to, George said. Da da da, Jane said. Da da da, George said. Now, that's better than, I can't believe you said that, Jane exclaimed. Well, you told me to, George exhorted. Said is better than really crazy tags, usually. Every so often, exclaimed, or someone can exclaim or exhort or exhume. Every time I read Conan Doyle, the 7-year-old in me chuckles to himself because Watson ejaculates regularly. Holmes, that's amazing. Watson ejaculated, and the word meant something different. I mean, it still means that now, but it was mostly used differently 100 years ago. So you can have a character with an exciting tag on occasion. Said is probably better, but even better, and read. Writers, read. Every time I run into a writer that's like, oh, I've never read a book in my life, I'm like, I'm not saying you can't be great, but I am saying you're really doing this the hard way. When you read, pay attention to how good writers put dialogue in the midst of people doing things. Something is going on and then somebody says something and you know who said it, even though no dialogue tag is present because of what just happened. And if a good thing to do when you're reading your stuff back, if you find that somebody said something and somebody said something and somebody said, and then you have to put your finger up at the top and then down below to recall who said what, don't make your readers do that, right? That would be a good time for a dialogue tag, or better yet, for some descriptive that attaches that dialogue to something going on, because the reader's smart enough. They'll figure it out. But what they don't want to do is have to figure something out. They want to just get it. And the better we write, the more smoothly we write, the more the reader will thank us for being drawn into that vivid and continuous dream that we mentioned earlier.
agreed. So I'm going to say you put in the dialogue tags for the characters just occasionally, at whatever point it feels like organically it's necessary. A lot of writers now will only use indirect tags, and which is one point where I don't agree with contemporary style. I think you can mix them in.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to use more indirect tags but there's something when I was in creative writing school, which was in the 90s, there was a lot of pressure on us to use as few words as possible. Cut, edit down, shorten. So for that reason, the indirect dialogue tag produced that kind of efficiency of language.
Yeah.
But it also, when you do it constantly, it becomes more annoying than character said. If there's too many indirect dialogue tags, then the style is attracting the wrong kind of attention.
There's a rhythm. There's a beautiful music to something that's written well. And to use music as a metaphor, I love jazz, but there's some free-form jazz where somebody will go off and blah, 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 till that sound becomes its own thing, and the rest of the instruments are lost in this one sound that keeps repeating itself, and that's not working. It's probably not working in the free-form jazz. Maybe my ear isn't tuned enough for that, but it's definitely not going to work in any writing, screenwriting, stage play, novel, nonfiction, whatever, where again, can't hammer this point too hard. If the reader notices the writer, if they're called attention to anything in the writing, then some element is being used too much, is being used too little. The balance is off. So,
I'm going to move us to the next topic only because I
please.
have limited Zoom time. So we had some preliminary chat on the topic of whether writing is a social activity. Because I think in the age of social media, there's more and more of writers wanting to write somehow in a group or having group sprints or things like that. And so I want to get your perspective on the idea of people making writing into a social activity and how that would affect the creative process and how viable it is for a writer to complete projects or develop skills that way.
Yeah. For one thing, if you ask 30 different writers what their process is, you'll probably get 30 different answers. William Faulkner apparently would stand at a desk and write longhand and throw the pages into a barrel for his secretary to type up later. Jules Verne left his family for 6 months to live on a houseboat and write 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which may or may not really be a great idea. I have a family and I don't think they would appreciate that. But if you are doing what you need to and the writing is getting done and nobody's getting hurt, it's probably a good process. I am not the sort to really share my writing. And so when the day comes that one of my scripts gets out there into the world, that is going to be an interesting challenge because then other people are involved. Other people are going to change it. The writing becomes collaborative at that point. If your aspiration is for screenwriting, for stage plays, other people are going to be involved. And at any point, they will be, unless you're writing, a novel or a screenplay that you're going to self-publish.
I am coming to the end, and we haven't come to the end of things to talk about, but I want to make sure that we get in some talking about your work. So I'm gonna, if with your permission, I'm gonna put up your Amazon page. You can tell us about a couple of books
Yeah, sure.
that you have right now.
I'm really shooting for Big Five, and I'm actually kind of sorry that I put The Feud. That's the one. If anybody thinks my what I've been saying is interesting, try the free Kindle sample of that one. If by the end where you would need to pay me, you're not hooked by the characters, don't give me money. Move on. But I wish I kind of had not self-published that one because now that I'm looking at Big Five, that one's out there. The other two are out there, and if the other nine or so books that I've written since, any of those catch fire, hopefully the ones that you see here can also be included. But if you're planning on traditional publishing, don't self-publish a thing because traditional publishers, agents, they're not going to be interested if it's already out there. But yes, The Feud, it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling. A girl whose kid sister, 14-year-old sister, is in puppy love with the boy next door. These are boys you were never supposed to talk to. And Andy, whose goal in life is to just get through her last year of high school and never talk to anybody, suddenly finds herself directing Romeo and Juliet with her sister and the boy next door in the starring roles, trying to keep their fathers from finding out about it, trying to keep cast members that hate her from quitting, trying to keep the world together as it falls down around her. A lot of humor, a lot of fun. The character, I love Andromeda. Call her Andy Sharp. She's fantastic. And again, try the free Kindle sample. By the time you get to the end, if you're not hooked, well, all you're out is time.
I think I want to read this one already. So we have The Silent Skater and The Kid.
Silent Skater. I went to see Mighty Ducks 3 in the 90s and came away thinking, what if there was this girl who was trying to find her place in a skating troupe, but she couldn't talk? And the story has evolved significantly since then. But basically, Charlene comes to live with the only family she has left in the world, and they just happen to have her aunt Elizabeth and cousin Melanie have a skating troupe, and she is a very fantastic skater, and her aunt Elizabeth doesn't want her to be on the troupe, but they need her to be on the troupe. And meanwhile, she can't talk because of an accident in her past. It left her mute. She can hear just fine. Nothing comes out. And just how somebody could, one of the things that I do, it's true with The Feud, it's true with The Silent Skater, it's somewhat true with The Kid, is third person close. In the first two books especially, you are on Andy's shoulder, and in the case of The Silent Skater, you're on Charlene's shoulder every moment, the entire book. You anything they don't know, anything they're not experiencing, you're not experiencing, and it's dangerous because if the story lags, if that one character can't carry it, things can be difficult. But if you love that character, knowing that every page is going to be about them, that you get to experience their story like you're living it, can be pretty powerful. And for Charlene, it was a challenge to write someone. There were times where I needed her to say something and she couldn't, and that was frustrating for me. It's like she has to get information across, but I don't know how to do that. So if you want, you can check out the book, see if I succeeded.
I just put out my video today, a day of interviewing about point of view, where I talked about third person limited. So that's an additional resource that I'm just gonna pitch that right here. So let's talk about The Kid, and
The
then
Kid is my
I'm gonna tell you how much I want to interview you again, and then we're gonna wrap it.
the Kid is my perhaps feeble attempt at historical fiction.
Mm.
It's late 40s baseball team. Kid shows up out of nowhere, and he is the best hitter anybody's ever seen. And the team really needs that. And there's certain members of the team that don't want that. And basically, not to ruin the ending, but just to tease it, I was standing on my bed. I'm like, I don't know, 9 or so, and I have a kid that old now. And I was pretending to play baseball, bottom of the ninth, uh, third game, seventh game of the World Series, 3 guys on, 2 balls, 2 strikes. It's the last pitch, and I hit the ball in my imagination, and then I was like, but what if I didn't run the bases? And I kept thinking about that and I tucked it away in my brain. And a decade later, when I wanted to write a baseball book, I was like, why wouldn't he run the bases? And I had to write the book to find out why. So,
And now I want to know. You are a stay-at-home father of three boys.
yes, I have three fantastic boys. Unfortunately, the 3-year-old decided to sleep through this, which made it a lot easier.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's one of the blessings of being a writer is that I get to do both things. And my wife has the joy of the full-time job, which she enjoys. So everybody wins.
You sent me a picture of the three boys, and you sent me the picture of a motorcycle. So tell me about that also.
Now, the three boys are far more important to me than the motorcycle, but
Yeah.
Isaac is 9, and next year he will be the same age I was when I started writing, which is weird. Andrew is 6, and Ryan is 3. The picture's a little younger than they are now, but that was a good one I had on hand. And oh, yeah, children are fantastic sources of inspiration.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, there's a motorcycle. We had a we set a record this morning in Colorado, -8
Mhm.
at like 12:01. So she's on a trickle charger in the garage, and I miss her terribly, but
Mhm.
it'll be warm enough here in a couple months. And man, nothing like riding around with a story idea in mind to figure out, oh man, that's what happens next.
Yeah,
That's
I do
amazing.
that. I do that when I'm commuting to work and commuting home from work, so I know the feeling. Well, we're out of time because of limitations of my Zoom, but I think
Yeah.
clearly there's a lot more we should be talking about. So I want to go ahead and extend an invitation for as soon as you have anything that you want to promote, or I'll let you know what are some of my upcoming topics are to see if you want to come on and talk about them because this has been great, and
Matt, it's been a
I wish we
pleasure.
had more
I'm,
time.
I'm happy whenever you want me.